was very engaged, very entertaining. It's kind of crazy. A lot of these things you don't even think about, until you're, I guess, directly faced with them. They're definitely things I've never really thought about people having to deal with.
Yeah, well, understanding each other is always half the battle. But welcome to part 2, y'all. We're
Woohoo!
talking about the thing that happened like a month and a half ago, but it's fine. People are still responding. People are still responding to the responses. It's fascinating to see how much conversation that this whole conversation has sparked in itself. So I'm excited to get going back onto it. And
It's very interesting too when you look at things in the over the matter of time. Like I've been watching a lot of like videos of comedians from like the early 2000s and even 2010s, and just the cultural shifts that you've seen. I mean, even just since the pandemic and just before all that, there's been a lot of changes and a lot of attitude. Different alliances of people too. So just for everybody out there, welcome to Unpopular Opinion. This is our brand new show. We're going to be talking about unpopular opinions, things that are going on in our cultural zeitgeist.
Yep, and without the lens of being ascribed to either side of the political spectrum. So hi,
Exactly.
My name's AC Allen. I'm your moderate guy with rosacea. I always feel so red when I get on camera. I'm like, I should really stop wearing shirts that have red in them. Yeah, today we are continuing piggybacking onto our very first episode, which was running quite a bit long, I'm sure.
This one is sure to be a heated debate. We're going to be talking about youth.
Yeah.
There's people that have plenty of opinions on both sides, and people are not afraid to voice their opinions here. You ready for this one?
Absolutely.
Wow, get the claws out, baby.
I don't think any minor should be having life-altering elective surgery or life-altering elective medicalization, period. And so...
It's okay for minors to get top surgery.
Really? You guys waited on that?
That's pretty vile.
I feel like the vibe is like, like as someone who had top surgery and went on hormones, like it's a very emotionally intense experience. I think in terms of like minors getting surgery, like the reason why I'm not like no to that is because I feel like maybe someone's like 17 or something. I honestly feel like it is a really intense surgery, but I feel like if somebody's like 17 or like late 16 and like feels like it's right for them, I mean, like people are really different. I know for me, like top surgery when I was like 16 would have been like so good, and it would have literally like saved my spinal cord from like binding all the time. That's why I'm like, yeah, like I feel like in instances like it can make sense.
I agree with a caveat that there does need to be some sort of process, which there is, by the way, in place.
Yes, absolutely.
Sometimes there's a slip through. Yes, things happen because, again, as I said earlier, this is a big world. But to, again, negate people the ability to walk through a door that you have walked through, I'm going to say this again, and then close it behind you, is a little bit of a slap in the face for anybody who's seeking transition.
Yeah.
And as somebody who has experienced top surgery and also waited quite a bit of time, a lot of severe damage actually was created to my rib cage that my wife, who is half my size, actually has the same size rib cage in the back as mine. And these are permanent damage to my body because I binded for about 8 years, and there's even still issues that I have with breathing and certain issues that I face that unfortunately, if I had that surgery a lot earlier, I would have a better posture. I'd have a lot of pain that is not within my body that I have to deal with on a daily basis, while simultaneously the idea that, I get maybe under 16 top surgery would be something that would possibly even make me a little uncomfortable, but I also know that I was homeless at 16, paying my own rent, and left my home at 16 and had to live my life as an adult very early. So I was able to make those decisions for myself, but I think it's weird that others can't seem to see that I could make a medical decision for myself when I had to physically take care of myself. And I look at some of these younger kids, and there's a sense of jealousy there and excitement for them at the same time, because they now have access to memories and being in the space and being in a comfortable body that You know, I had a lot of isolation growing up in my childhood because I didn't feel comfortable to present in a female space or a male space. I was isolated constantly from school, from the outside world, from my family. And my transition, my top surgery has done nothing but take physical pain off my body, especially with as large chested as I was and having to bind for as many years as I did.
Okay, so now I am curious if we did watch this, because I do recall, but I don't remember if we actually took the time to comment on it. We might have stopped there. First things first, can I just say I love the innocence of someone like Sasha on this debate panel. But like this when I hear someone kind of ramble on with that, it kind of makes me feel bad, because I feel as though maybe he's not quite ready for a conversation like this, or at least not a public forum one. You can sense the nervousness there.
Right.
The second thing I have to say, Alexander, why are you weighing in on this when you're like the one person on this panel that's never going to have top surgery?
Yeah, I wasn't really understanding the contribution here to this conversation.
Well, yeah, and then on top of that, you're advocating for children, minors, to get life-altering surgeries, while at the same time saying that there is a step and a process to it. But you're like kind of circumventing all of that by suggesting that, well, a kid would know or have the time. And then thirdly, we have Shane, who again projects an awful lot during this entire thing about his personal experiences growing up. You know, it sounds like Homeboy did not have a good structure of his family, and you know, talks an awful lot about the trauma. Like, there's a lot of trauma dumping happening during this whole thing from him, about, you know, being homeless at 16, taking care of themselves. And yes, there are kids out there who can get emancipated legally from their guardians, if you know they go through those courses and rights. I think that's a whole different subject, though. If it's a kid who's already had to go off on their own and pay their way and is emancipated, then, well, yeah, you, I guess, could then be considered for something like this. I think
you're in a different situation than the majority of people can be. The other thing I wanted to say about Shane really quick that was bothering me is a lot of these timelines weren't matching up for me, because Shane was saying that he had to bind for 8 years. Yeah. And I was thinking, like, hey, the debate is, should someone who's 16 years old be allowed to make that decision? So, you know, unless you had huge breasts at age 8, I don't think that it's a different discussion. It's a different discussion when you're an adult. You can do whatever you please. When your brain is fully developed, when you're no longer under the guardianship, you know, and that's the one little thing that sets Shane apart from Sasha, I guess, the situation.
Yes. Although
the whole thing with binding, okay, I want to ask, do you know anybody who binds? I mean, other than, you know, for stage, I'm sure there's, you know, all kinds of crap happening.
I mean, yes, I know people who did do a lot of binding. You know, a lot of the performers that were in my show were trans or non-binary, you know, men. So born as women, you know, but dressing as a man or living as a non-binary person. But I would hear them talk an awful lot about it. Yes, that, you know, binding is a big part of the dysphoria. At the same time, both Shane and Sasha kind of talk about their binding experiences and how detrimental it was to their health. But this is also a physical thing that they were doing to themselves in an attempt to try to suppress their breasts due to their dysphoria. The funny thing is that I was at a Susie's not that long ago, and I saw that they sell apparatuses there specifically to help bind. So we've come a long way. People were doing it back in the day where they were wrapping themselves with like ace bandages and duct tape, and that can do some damage. I mean, I've seen how some male performers dressing in drag would tape themselves up to make it, you know, look less like a bulge down there. This was before we embraced the bulge, Dylan. Anytime that you're taking something to constrict part of your body that intensely, it's going to leave some damage. So, you know, if you are someone who is just developing at a very rapid rate at a very young age, like say at 8 o'clock, you're getting massive C cups, and by that point, you might want to go to consult a doctor to slow that down, because kids aren't really ready to process those things.
You know what? You know what I see? I still feel like it comes back to one basic thing. if we didn't have such a strict definition of what it is to be a man or what it is to be a woman, if you were, if you're a tomboy type woman, then fine, that's what you are. But it doesn't. I don't think half of these problems would be an issue. People would just accept other people, and people would just be who they are, do what they like to do. But I have a penis or I have a vagina.
And I think there's a huge different discussion about allowing children that are under the age to socially transition, meaning if you want to dress a certain way, if you want to wear makeup, if you don't want to, like, again, just because you're a girl doesn't mean that you have to wear makeup.
Right.
And just because you're a boy that likes makeup does not automatically make you a girl.
Right.
We really kind of got to stop allowing people to say, well, no, these extreme things are totally rational when they seem very much driven by irrational emotion and thought that's stemming more from a personal stance. I feel there's a lot of projection of they think that if they would have had this access to this stuff at a younger age, that their life would have infinitely been better. And you don't know that is an intangible thing to think, oh, how different would I be if I would have had this back then?
All right, let's get into this next clip.
Yes, let's do it.
Here we go.
I don't think any minor should be having life-altering elective surgery or life-altering elective medicalization, period. And so when I work on bills across the country that do ban this for minors, there's a couple things I point out. I point out that I don't think a 16-year-old female who wants breast implants should be able to get that either. When we look at what we allow minors to do, like surgeries and stuff like that, they're not life-saving. They're not, if you don't get it, you're not going to die. It's not like getting, like having appendicitis and having to get your appendix removed or anything like that. It's elective. I think that's the key point here.
Agreed. My thing about surgery, that I agree with to an extent.
This is definitely the prompt that I am the most passionate about because I think there are few things more vile, more irresponsible, more, dangerous than saying a child can consent to permanently removing a body part that serves an extremely important function. Detransitioners all over the country can never breastfeed their children if they can even have them, because if they did other things, that can stop them from having kids at all, right? The idea that a child can consent to a sex change, to gender-affirming surgery, if you believe that, there's really nothing that you can believe they can't consent to, right? Because that's pretty extreme. That's a permanent body modification under the best circumstances. So you want to move aside all the complications, all the things you can't do, the sterilization, not being able to feed your kids. You can even set that aside. Just the permanent body modification, I mean, you have to be so demented to believe that a child fully understands. I heard a few conversations about, well, if the child fully understands, they don't.
I mean, Sarah, again, for the win. She's the most consistent person in this debate that just is like, this is the point blank period statement. And I have to agree. And like I was just saying, it isn't a life altering thing that if it doesn't happen right now, you're going to die. It's,
right.
You just have to be patient and wait.
Right.
So,
and again, I really don't think there's anything wrong with taking, a year to live as, because maybe you won't like it. Maybe if once you get into being a male, you'll be like, oh, wow, there's things I didn't know that it was like to be a dude.
There was a recent viral video actually of a trans man that breaking down, very upset because of that exact thing. He had transitioned, obviously had full facial hair, everything like that, but was just so taken aback by how living life as a man is so vastly different from being a woman, that the way that men really socialize and treat each other is drastically different, and
Right.
it's not as empathetic, it's not as caring. So yeah,
I would be really interested to see. I haven't seen. God, it's been so long since I've been in college, so I haven't seen like the last edition of the medical, the medical definitions book that I can't remember what it's called, the MD5 or something. But I wonder if like things like body dysphoria, if the definitions have changed now for recent times. It seems to me so many things that we just see as acceptable and as normal nowadays. I mean, not even 15 years ago was seen as a mental disorder of some sort.
Not true. And again, a lot of that could be the over medicalization of kids. Even from my generation, kids were being put on antidepressants and ADHD medicine left and right, as young as 9 or 10. And long-term studies of these things just haven't happened yet. So we don't know what the fallout damage is going to be.
Right.
But even going back to what Blair was saying, like, it is a slippery slope of, if you're saying that kids can consent to this, at what point are we gonna lose the ability to say, well, they can't consent to all this other stuff though?
Can they consent to have sex?
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, there's lawmakers. I saw a video recently about some Republican lawmaker defending the right for a parent to allow their 12-year-old to marry somebody. Let's move on. Let's keep.
There's one more on this topic. So we basically we have these clipped up by kind of general topics. So there's one more on this topic, and then we move on to the next one. Let's finish this one out.
It's easy to say, well, if it's 17-year-olds, okay, well,
In my state, that's actually
there's a
legal
nuanced
age.
conversation about even 17-year-olds, I guess, because the age of consent in some places is lower, but that's not what's happening, right? It's 12-year-olds.
When we talk about minors, it's like, what age range are we really talking about here?
Anyone
because
under
the
18.
because the thing is, when we talk about detransitioners or whatnot, all I hear is a lot of regret, right? Regret that they got these surgeries, regret of the complications, regret, and that's fine. I'm not taking away anybody's experience because these things do happen. But let's also remember, again, there is a process. Now, I have a lot of empathy for those detransitioners that have gone through the process and they are suffering.
But
I
it's
do
not
have
just
empathy for
detrans
that.
people. It's
But
not just
but that's
detrans
where
people.
that's where I'm just talking about in the conversation, for this particular conversation. And I understand what you're saying, because you're absolutely right. There are more people.
Even
that are
among
doing
adults,
that.
we all
But-
do different things in
but-
our transition. Some of us
correct.
want bottoms, some of us don't. Some of us want tops, some of us don't.
I
So
understand,
you
but-
need a lot of time as an adult to figure out what you want to do.
But see, the thing is, though, some adults don't even understand what they want to do.
Exactly.
So,
So
that's the
how
kind
can a
of thing.
child?
But
But
see,
I wanna
children,
touch
wait a
on
minute,
one
let's
thing
not,
you
let's,
said.
let's not underestimate.
To your point about the reason why I'm against it is because, like you said, the children need to go through the proper steps, the parents, the doctors. But in the state of California, if you, as a parent, tell your minor, no, you're not getting this, I'm not affirming your gender, I'm taking your kids away, and California is going to raise your kids for you. So
Canada
how's
too.
that?
Canada too.
That's not right.
We also know that like all those safeguards that you're talking about, they're not happening.
Yeah, that's
They're
what
not
I'm saying.
happening at all.
California will
and we,
take your
we
kids.
we know because there was a whistleblower out of St. Louis, and this isn't some conservative whistleblower. She was married to a trans man, and she considers herself queer. So she blew the whistle and said that they had an in-house doctor. If you couldn't find a affirming therapist to sign off on the form, they would pencil whip it.
But do you believe that it should happen? Do you believe there should be a process?
It's about caring
It
about
is.
kids.
I'm talking. Oh my God.
It's
Get it
obsession.
together.
I have it together.
Yo, the obsession with the conservatives about other people's kids. If it is your child, it is your choice what you do with your kid.
Just to talk about someone who's at 16 and their level of consent.
Yeah, there's a reason why people have to wear motorcycle helmets when they ride a motorcycle or a seatbelt when they drive a car. Because, we don't always, as Americans, make the best decisions for ourselves, let alone our children. And I'm saying that as a dad.
Yeah. Again, I had a coworker, and I think we must have talked about this, because I remember saying something about it before. But I had a coworker just recently tell me that she's not allowed to have access to her kids' medical stuff, and they're 12. And it's like, but I'm their mother. I should kind of be knowing what's happening with my kid as far as their health is concerned. So it is interesting to see where in the, what is the word I'm looking for? in the search for trying to bring in more progressive and inclusive ideas, we often forget the phrase that the path to hell is paved on good intentions.
Right.
And that's why there needs to be a check in guard. Again, Blossom is somebody who seems to agree with a lot of things on the conservative side, but is still trying to play both sides. You know, if you believe in the process and you trust in the process, then we just need to make sure that that process is the correct one.
But even
but when we do see
Blossom herself said that even a lot of adults don't know
yeah,
what they want.
I mean that's the quiet part out loud in a nutshell right there. You literally just gave up your whole argument that you admit that even adults don't have their shit figured out yet.
Yeah. You know, youth is definitely, that's always a tough conversation. Let's change it up a bit. This is a whole new one. This is number 6, and then
Non-binary should not be considered under the trans umbrella.
Let's go, girl.
This is evil.
I think that the concept of a transgender umbrella is inherently an issue, right? Because when you're talking about something as nuanced, complex, full of social dynamics, medical dynamics, so many things to be considered. When you're talking about a transsexual, you should really be specific, right? And this entire concept actually of transgender is relatively new. Like it came about in the 70s or 80s through queer theory, when originally it was about transsexuals, which was considered a medical diagnosis, which was a medical process, and it defined something very specific. So for me, when I hear that non-binary, which if I'm to understand correctly, means that
androgynous.
Right, and it means you identify somewhere in between male and female. That's not what a transsexual is.
The definition of a trans person is somebody whose body has been altered, or somebody who identifies as a different gender whose body has been altered via hormones or surgery.
And there's 2 genders, so if you want to say, you identify as a different gender, it has to be one of those 2, which would make you a transsexual if you're actually trans. I think it makes about as much sense as saying that bisexual is under the straight umbrella. It's like, no, that's a separate thing. And I think there's beauty in being separate things. There's beauty in having your own lanes. And my concern is there's so much, clearly, as we see today, really heated conversations about trans people that when you start adding in queer theory, non-binary, it just makes it muddy, and the people at home, don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Here's the thing about a lot of the people who identify as non-binary, so to speak. When they do so, they typically don't medically transition.
Right.
And when you do so, at that point, it's a costume.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Like-
it's gender nonconformity, right? And so we,
Because they can
Blair's
take
saying-
this off. I can't take this off.
Yeah, as Blair's saying, we look at gender nonconformity, which used to be okay. You can wear what you want. You can present however you want, but it doesn't make you something different. You can't.
I think it would be really hard for a cis person to truly imagine what it's like to be trans and what it's like to live with that and be born that way. And I'm not non-binary, and so I really cannot picture what it would, because I'm a binary trans person. I can't imagine what it's like to be in between that. But just like how the cis person can't really truly understand that, it doesn't mean that it's not a thing and it's not real. And I really believe that we have like 85 years like on this earth, and like so many people spend so much time being like sad and uncomfortable in their bodies. And if we were just all comfortable, like if somebody like wants to go by a name and like dress a certain way and they are saying, this makes me so comfortable, this is what makes me happy, there is no reason they shouldn't do that. And my God, there is no reason why we should say, well, you're not a part of this because like this is us and like this is whatever. Because literally like we could all sit here and agree that like non-binary people are like not a part of the trans community or whatever, which is not my opinion. But we could like, that doesn't like change anything. Like we have a vast community. And I believe that non-binary people are a part of the community because I have so many shared experiences with so many non-binary people I know. We have very similar experiences in growing up with dysphoria, with transition, with anything, and nobody has to do anything. Nobody has to transition in a way they don't want to transition. And yeah, like let's be a happy family. My God, let's all just be happy. That's my vibe.
Yeah, or fight the fight together.
You know, it seems to me that this whole thing, and maybe you're gonna have to fill me in, because the whole LGBTQA. I don't even know. Honestly, I don't even know what all the letters are anymore.
Half the people in the goddamn community don't know what the acronym is.
It all comes down to who I like to and how I like to. Am I allowed to say that? I don't know.
Okay, so
I mean, really, like, is it why is it so important? Why is it so important that everybody knows that you like to have sex with dudes.
Okay, but this kind of, again, for me at least, comes into what my issue with the current ideology and the acronym is about. We act as though genitalia does not have any sort of impact on who we are, and yet absolutely it does. Conversely, women, with vaginas, we have to be cis women. They are the ones that experience, a menstrual cycle. That's something I could never fathom in my life, because I know it's got to be just incredibly uncomfortable. I know from personal interactions with my coworkers, there are times they call me in like, "Hey, I just started my period. Like, I'm bleeding through my pants. Can you come in early, please? Because I need to go." And I totally understand. I think that there's something to be said about the need for us to recognize difference amongst each other. There's a reason that we have each of the letters in the acronym, right? The LGBTQIAA plus whatever the fuck it is now. At the same time, at one point, the LGBT was really talking about people of a different sexuality. We're talking about lesbians, bisexuals, gay people, and transsexuals at that point. Like Blair said, it's kind of a relatively new term, the transgender, and the way that we view sex and gender as being this like separate entity now is kind of the thing that I think created a lot of the miscommunication or a lot of the misunderstandings that we see today, especially with like the older generation, with the newer generation. In their mind, sex and gender were synonymous. So by telling them that it's different, it's like, but why?
Okay, well, let me ask you a question, AC. A transgender man, is that a woman or a man to you biologically?
Well, biologically, they were born female, so they still would be technically female. This is the thing. If sex and gender are truly different, you can't negate the sex aspect of you, regardless as if you want to transition to the other one, right? So you can't absolutely 100% change your sex from from one to the other. Okay, you can change your gender. That's a secondary aspect. Your secondary sexual characteristics are what we typically identify each other with visually without seeing what's in your pants.
Do you feel really, like a transgender woman is the same as a regular woman? Like all women are the same?
Well, no, because to say that all women are the same to begin with would be an untrue statement. Not all women act, dress, or behave in the same manner. They don't all experience things in the same manner. They come in all different shapes and sizes and colors, and then some. And it again, for me, it's about dismantling the gender roles and norms and rules that say that because you are born as one thing, you have to act this way.
Right.
But you can't combat that by saying, "Oh, hey, if you're a little kid that, the boy that wants to play with Barbies, that must mean you're actually a girl." No, they could just be a boy that likes Barbies. Ding, 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 right here.
I mean, look at Calvin Klein, right? He's a fashion designer. There's so many.
No, I know, and that's just it. Let the little gay femboys be little gay femboys. Let the little butch lesbians be the butch lesbians.
All right, here we go. I think
doctors are manipulating trans medical care.
I think there's three types of doctors out there. I think there are the ones who absolutely think that they're doing this for the right reasons. I think that there are the ones who are absolutely doing it for money, like we saw at Vanderbilt. The people at Vanderbilt literally said this is a huge moneymaker. And then I think that there are, I don't know if it's incompetence or ineptitude or laziness. Because what we're seeing, not just in the trans community, we're seeing in society, SSRIs being pushed on patients. Mental health doctors are pushing so many different drugs without getting to the root issues.
See, I have an interesting perspective on this. I've been out for 11 years this year. I've been on testosterone since I was 15 years old. And even looking into it, I waltzed my little ass up into that doctor's office and I left on testosterone. He gave me my first shot in the doctor's office that day. Oh my gosh. I was 15 years old. What if I had been wrong? what if I had been wrong? It really just is that simple.
I'm joining mid-convo.
Wow, nice to see you.
Because I think like it's not, I don't think it's like a huge widespread issue, but I think when we have like a for-profit healthcare system, it does happen. Like I feel like there are, I believe that people should be evaluated and go through tests. And like for me, getting on testosterone and getting surgery was a massive process in my life. But I do think that it probably happens. Just like you said, like with SSRIs and stuff, like things are overprescribed.
There were really almost no detransitioners as recent as like 5-6 years ago. And the fact that it's exploded now shows that it is a massive issue. And, you know, I think that I can reflect what you said. I was over 18 when I started my hormones, but I had a 20-minute appointment, and just like you, I walked in and out with an estrogen prescription. Insane. I wasn't tested
I didn't
for my
have to
levels.
see a therapist first.
No.
I had no letter.
And you were a child.
I was a
That's
child.
crazy.
I was
So,
15
and
years
that
old.
is a very,
In
very
one of the most
common-
conservative states in the country. So if that's what's going on
Wow.
in Georgia,
Wow.
imagine what's going on everywhere else.
California, hello.
Yeah, when I went for my initial appointment, I literally
Work with the detrans community, and the problem is I actually don't really care too much about, you know, if you are an adult and you walk into a doctor's office and want estrogen and you walk out, I don't think that's an issue. What is an issue is when doctors are not giving all the information, when they're actually telling you that this is what's right for you, and then it's not. They're actually manipulating their patients. They're manipulating, you know, they say if you don't do this, you're gonna kill yourself, and all this stuff. So I would actually rather a doctor say, I have no idea what this is gonna do to you, but it's your body, your choice, you can do what you want, and then leave you on your way, and you can make that decision.
Right.
I think they're not asking the patient why. Why do you feel this way?
Well, I have to say, I feel bad for Jessica that her comment got cut off. That poor woman.
She's always getting cut off.
I know. I do find that this moment is an interesting one in this debate because it's I think the only time that someone from the opposite camp comes over to join them in agreement that, you know, this is a problem. That took a lot of balls, no pun intended. But at the same time, like, the fact of the matter is that everyone sitting at that panel, and I think we'll get into it in the next clip too, talks about how they just easily got access to this kind of medicalization, walked in and walked out, and at 15 in Georgia, and we're talking what, 11 years ago, before this was as big of a thing now. So there is something to be said about a for-profit healthcare system that's going to prescribe kids these drugs or convince their parents to put them through these surgeries and fast track it because there's something to be made off of it. It kind of goes against the Hippocratic Oath, but you know, like Sarah said, again, Sarah for the win. There's 3 types of doctors. There's the ones that genuinely think that they're doing it for the right reasons, and then there's people that, you know, are exploiting it just because of monetary gain.
You know, I was thinking recently about what I call the noble professions, right? When we were little kids, there were certain people that we were taught were they just automatically get cool points, right? Firemen, doctors, EMT people, police people, supposedly, and all of that's been like flipped on its head now. And
I don't know. Everyone still seems to find firefighters hot. I know.
Yeah,
I do.
firefighters. You can't. There's not a lot to say about firefighters.
Yeah. But it's people who put themselves in harm's way or take the time to help others as their profession. There is something that's noble about that.
Right.
And, you know, again, I think there's something to be said about that pursuit of happiness. I think that at the end of the day, true trans people are just trying to pursue their happy, right? And there should be nothing that it should not allow them to do so outside of, you know, an age restriction. And at the same time, we still need to take into consideration that there needs to be borders, there needs to be boundaries, there needs to be lines and rules set in place so that people can't step into these things and then exploit them.
We're gonna see, I think, as the series goes along. I honestly feel like, and you know, maybe some people will point fingers and laugh at me and call me a conspiracy theorist, but I kind of feel like I'm used to it. I kind of feel like at some of these things there are bigger hands at play. They
Oh, there are.
seem like personal problems, but they've been created by much more intelligent people and people with better resources than we have. Why do you think so many people buy media corporations, buy dying newspapers, buy dying TV stations? Because when you control the media, you control the narrative. Hey, I think that was 7A that we did, right? Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so 7B.
Moving on to 7B.
Moving on up, moving on up.
I had a similar experience. I was able to walk in and get access to hormones. And that system was set up through advocacy because of what a lot of community folks are actually facing when it comes to access to hormones, access to medical care, access to all of these things. So a lot of these nonprofits actually got rid of a lot of the red tape, because for some individuals like myself who was actually homeless during my transition process, I would have never been able to afford access or get through all of this process. Now, can I admit that there is some medical malpractice? Yes, I myself had issues obtaining testosterone consistently. For some reason, the script doesn't match up, or you got to get in contact with a doctor. And it was part of the reason why I chose actually to go off testosterone, because I didn't like the idea of not having constant access, because I was worried about the damage that it could cause to my body, and also because I wanted to keep intact my reproductive rights. From what I have seen when it comes to these detransitioners, from my understanding in terms of the statistics, trans people are 8% of the population, and then the detransitioners are somewhere from 1% to 8% as well. So all of these laws that are coming in is to affect the entire community as a broad.
So I just have to say some things that were brought up about detransitioners, which I found just a little bit ironic, right? Because for a community that is 1% or less of the general population, we can never seem to find it within ourselves to find empathy for it, even if it is the 1% of our community, which is detransitioners, and for the horrific medical malpractice, abuse, mental and spiritual turmoil they go through. It's like, so we want the rest of the world to say this 1% matters, but our 1% doesn't matter. That's the first thing. The second thing is, it's not as if they detransition because of, just like you said, the loosening of all the restrictions to get on these drugs. It's like, that's not a good thing. Gatekeeping is a good thing. Like making sure the right people are getting on these drugs so there aren't regret cases, there aren't botched cases. That's what we have to go towards, because right now we're going down the slippery slope of anyone can get on it. Every single person here, I'm pretty sure, just stated that they went in and walked out in an hour or less to get their hormones. And that's a huge problem, especially a child.
Because of things that have happened to me, I can see a
15,
future where transitioning for adults is banned. Like, I can, because of everything that's going on with kids.
Yeah, I think most of us are against a ban on stuff like that. Obviously,
Yeah,
we're all sitting
obviously,
here for a reason.
but-
I think I had the common ground, though, because everybody here kind of also admitted that we don't have the research. And so when we don't have the research, and I'll tell you, I think that adults can do what they want, but I think we don't push forward with transitioning children until we have the research. We do the research. And this is actually what GenSpec pushes as well. GenSpec organization, they push to get more research on it, so we absolutely know what this does. Because even the WPATH guidance, the latest guidance from WPATH, everything that it says even about puberty blockers, it says, it cites a study, and then it says we don't know.
To your point about gaining research, how do you expect the medical community to gain access to research if we're just preventing these folks to actually go through any of the processes to learn the scientific method of what is happening? Just like it with AZT drugs, where we learned that that was actually harming us, and now we have things like Biktarvy.
Yeah, so it's the same way as we have with any research. You have a very select, very heavy gatekeeping crew that you're allowed to, create these studies around. And you need a good checklist to be like, these people show all the actual signs of gender dysphoria. They are having like very strong distress, and in every state that's passed bans on access for minors also has provisions, except for in the most extreme cases.
So, fun enough in that moment, Shane did a couple of things that I just have to comment on. One, making the claim that 8% of the population in the United States is transgender. That is factually.
That sounds like a lot of people.
That no, that number is way too high. I literally just did the research myself by looking it up, and we're talking more like 0.05%.
Yeah, I would believe that.
Half
Well,
of
what
a percent.
what population is homosexual? I would say that is dedicated, not like bisexual, but just like straight up homosexual. I would say it's a good 12%.
Again, historically throughout time, it's about 10%. It might be up to 12. I'm gonna look it up right now. LGBT identification rises to 5.6 in latest U.S. estimate. There's another one that says 7.2%. I think that would be people who are out and proud. There is definitely a 3% margin of error, I would say. Lost it. They don't want to come to terms with it. That's why we have a lot of the most staunch anti-gay people out there are almost always closeted homosexuals.
Can you imagine, like, we have history books and we have like video of, what life was like in the 30s and 40s with early cameras and things like that. Can you imagine what people are going to say 100 years from now about this time period? I mean, like, ever since the pandemic, like, or right around this whole time period, even before the pandemic, let's face it, we've been getting stupid for a long time, but just there's just been some general nonsense that has just happened on the planet in the last, I'd say, 6-7 years.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to mired thinking that if something doesn't agree with you, that you can just label it as a phobic or a bigot or something. And that's just it. A lot of I had issues with all of this when it first came out because I just saw it as a very fallible argument and a very slippery slope. I don't know if it's in the next clip or not, but I think Alexander does talk a little bit about something. So yeah, I think let's get to the next clip.
Gender affirming transition is suicide prevention.
Look at our unified front.
I mean, obviously, it's a known thing that trans youth are at greater risk of suicide and just suicidal ideations, which are horrible and will plague you and like ruin your life and make it awful. And so I know there are a lot of kids in a lot of pain, and growing up as a trans kid, I was in so much pain, and I feel like I could have been spared of a lot of that and gotten to enjoy my life a lot more if I had earlier access to gender affirming care. And even the gender affirming care that I did receive later in my life, and I went on hormones when I was like 16 and I got top surgery at 17, that completely changed my life in the most dramatic way. And so yeah, I think it is life-saving care, and I think a lot of trans people would agree.
I agree as well too. I think gender dysphoria is a real thing, and we all deal with gender dysphoria differently. I know for myself or whatnot, there were times I wanted to end it all. And for me, I went to desperate measures to align my body with how I feel on the inside. And for some of us, especially living in the South, we don't always have access to hormone care. So some of us have to go to the black market. We have to do things to our body to be able to align us to where we are not willing to commit suicide. I don't think that's the only way. I think there are other ways as well too, but honestly, sometimes people just want somebody that cares, that wants to listen as part of the regimen to being able to prevent suicide.
I've chosen to not medically transition in my bottom half, let's put it that way. But, and this is the first time I'm actually saying this out loud, but I am having facial feminization surgery. And that was an incredibly, ridiculously difficult journey, even as an adult who has a really good job and access to really great healthcare. But I still had to go through so many hoops, and I was still denied by insurance. And in my own personal life, I've also struggled quite a bit with mental health, and a lot of that really relates to the certain parts of my body. Like, I always hated my body when I was younger, and I didn't understand why. And and I was always dressing, as like a cis male, and I just had all this stuff just didn't fit. It just didn't feel right, and it was just like this darkness in my life. Like, I just wanted it, gone. And I just learned to live with it. But then eventually, like, after figuring out who I am and all of that. Like now I know like this is life-saving care. Like this for me is life-saving care. Like who knows where I could be in a few years had I not known who I am and had access to care.
How y'all doing?
Transition, I mean, we're all here, we know. Transition is not an easy process. It takes a heavy mental toll. And so I really think that you have, if you're already suicidal, you have to get that in check. You have to be in a healthy place before you can even think about going through the medicalization of transitioning. You can socially transition. I think that's absolutely fine. But I think that, you know, before you even think about medically transitioning, then I think you have to have your head right before that. Because and hormones will make you feel kind of crazy anyways. So I think that that's why, it's not.
Crazy.
Right? And sometimes when we create a narrative, it can kind of take on a life of its own. So I know there's a lot of talk about suicide statistics in the trans community. And interestingly, almost all of those statistics come out of LGBT activist organizations who have an incentive to put those numbers out to portray this image that we are suffering greatly, we're under attack, and then all of those suicide rates are due to societal mistreatment. And when these kids are being told, like you said, when they're going into these doctors, the doctors are telling their parents essentially emotional blackmail.
Okay, so fascinatingly enough, I have to point out, Alexander could have easily brought up that whole story about trying to get access to facial feminization and the hurdles that are going through in the last topic.
Right.
And some, for whatever reason, just chose not to. Everyone's sitting up there saying, oh, yeah, we got treatment really easy. We got it really, really easy. And then you don't take that opportunity to say it then. But now you're going to bring it.
Very misleading.
Well, not only that, but the topic is suicide prevention as a correlation to gender affirming care. And
what is gender affirming care? Is that, I mean, would that be therapy?
It's going through hormone therapy or hormone reassignment, HRT, whatever. I forget what that stands for. But regardless, what we're looking at is that the question in the prompter is giving people access to this stuff going to drop the suicide rates? Now, I do want to say I saw some elected officials that were discussing this, and the one said that it dropped the likelihood of suicide for people by like 75 or 80% within the trans community. But when I was hearing that number and then looking at it and did the math, you're still talking about like 10% are still gonna kill themselves, and we're looking at a suicide rate that's pretty high for any given group. So it is higher than the average American, but at the same time, the greatest numbers of suicides actually come from men. We see it and that's just it. People don't care about men. They don't care about the suicide rates that are affecting those people because, well, they're part of a bigger majority. So it doesn't matter if there's hundreds of thousands of more people dying from suicide. We're still looking at the statistic of that. Oh my God, the trans people, it's just such a high number because of the percentage rate that we're looking at. But I also think that this is the double-edged sword of it all. You can't use the excuse of, oh, you have to give somebody this access or this care, or they're going to kill themselves. That to me is emotional manipulation. That is kind of a teenager thing to do, to say, oh, hey, if I don't get this car that I want, I'm going to kill myself. Like you couldn't get away with doing that. And I don't think that you should be getting away with doing it for these reasons either. What's fascinating though, Sasha is still talking about how, oh my God, the arduous task of growing up, not having access to this, but you got hormones and your top surgery at 16.
17.
Well, yeah, 17.
17 was the surgery.
How long did you really have this mental anguish going on? Because it sounded like maybe 4 or 5 years.
I was trying to, and that's what I was thinking with this. With all of this, I guess therapy, it seems like they would have therapy that would go along with it, and it would be a process. So even if you could not physically transition at 16, you would be talking to doctors, you would be trying out the lifestyle, making sure that it fits you, so that when you're ready to push the button and when you are legally able to push the button, you can do so with all of the information, good and bad, having seen both sides.
Yes, and to Sarah's point, if you're already kind of suicidal, going on to gender affirming hormone treatments might not necessarily be the thing that helps you. It could actually trigger that even worse, because it does complicate things with that. You have to get your head right. So if someone is truly suicidal, fundamentally, for this reasoning, it's because they don't love who they are. They don't love who they are because they don't look like what they feel like they are. And that's where the dysphoria comes from. And that's where the mental anguish comes from. What I see in the mirror, I don't like looking at that. But I think a lot of people, they ultimately don't cope well with it, because even after transitioning, even after the surgeries, even after all the hormones, fundamentally somewhere deep down they still don't love themselves.
You never dealt with the real problem in the first place.
Yeah, and the real problem that seems to happen is that they will do all this stuff and they're still not recognized as that thing they are, or they're never able to attain it. Like, you're never going to fully become 100% woman, and that it just in saying that triggers so many people. That's trans women are women. Well, the trans woman is a different female experience than being a natural born cisgendered woman, right? So that
not everybody will say that, though.
No, and that's the unpopular opinion here. Unpopular opinion here. I think that they are in their own lanes, and I think that they are fundamentally different from one another, and there's nothing wrong with that, because people are all different. We should embrace our differences. I think we have one more clip.
We got one more.
And I feel that we're kind of derailing from what this topic was.
So. Here we go. Let's rock this last one out.
A, B, or C. And that's the case with detrans people as well. They have this huge host of issues: depression, body dysmorphia, anorexia, eating disorders, maybe sexual abuse in their past. People don't know that a long observed symptom of sexual abuse is wanting to be the other gender to cope with it.
So
this has been in textbooks forever. So I just think, I'll wrap it up really quickly. I just think it's a false dichotomy that it's either death or transition. But with that said, I agree with you. I appreciate everything that transition's done for me, but it's too much of a roll of the dice, and I think it's unhealthy telling people, do it or you're gonna die, especially a child.
So for the LGBTQ organizations, we also have to remember that they are relying on reputable resources. And a lot of those reputable resources are the medical research that has been put out there. So all they can do is take that information and be able to disseminate that into the community. And to be quite honest with you, hold on just a second. To be quite honest with you, and let's also be clear that these researchers are also collaborating with these organizations, because they are the ones that have the most outreach to the community that they need to serve, which is the trans community. Because oftentimes the reason why nonprofit grassroots organizations are created in the first place is because there was no place for us. And so it is really hard to get that research to be able to do that. We can agree to disagree, but the research has not been completely fulfilled yet, because a lot of these people don't even know about our experience, and that is why it's important that we make it very clear what we need to do.
There's also, speaking of the numbers that come out of LGBT activist organizations,
a lot of that focus has always been around Black trans women, because we do not get to see the age of 35. You are in a place, when I say privilege, you're in a place of privilege where you do not have to worry about the harassment and the discrimination that I face. I face as a Black person. I face as a Black person. I'm not going to say that you do not experience harassment or discrimination. That's not what I'm saying, because like you said, you're a person of nuance. And so follow me here. When I come as a person of color, as a Black trans woman, you and I do not get to have that same experience. There are
you went to the White House, I didn't.
There are more rooms that you get to walk in that I will be forbidden in. And one thing about it is, that's why it's important, like someone like me has to create her own space to be able to counteract what you're doing. And I'm not saying that you don't. But what I'm saying here is, what I'm trying to get you to understand is, my Blackness should not have to pay for your whiteness that
doesn't make
is
sense.
destroying my community.
I'm
Because of
destroying your
privilege.
community.
So are you gonna tell all of my exes
How are you gonna
that?
say that and then
What
not
do you
say it?
suggest then to use a tool then to gather data? Because from my understanding, a lot of those surveys are actually more accurate because folks are actually not in front of somebody, so they're more comfortable to answer these questions. Again, we can have a difference of opinion, but what tool then do you suggest folks to use if they're not using a survey then? How do you gain that data?
Well, you're talking to therapists who can speak, they can't violate HIPAA, but they can give statistics on their patients. You can look at see how many people have entered into facilities because they were suicidal on that. And then you can go back and see if we gave these same people gender affirming care, how did it help them? Because I see a lot of, again, go back to the detransition community, because we affirm their gender so much, there's so much, they're now having issues. They're contemplating suicide at a higher level as well.
Great. I enjoyed this debate for what it was.
Well, I think again, it's a matter of not looking at what the real problem is, not dealing with all of the mental issues before the going through the transition. So many of those people, like you had mentioned, had been abused, or Blair had mentioned a lot of times people who are transgender have been have been molested.
That there's a correlation between sexual abuse and then wanting to become the opposite
opposite gender, right? Exactly. And a lot of times too, I've heard from from videos and unfortunately from friends who have dealt with assault of different types, that like a lot of them will gain weight, so they become less attractive, or they'll start dressing more, I guess, manly, start wearing baggier clothes, or so that they're not as easily seen. I guess they're not as attractive.
A lot of these things are telltale correlations of what that kind of experience can do to somebody on a mental level, and I think that does have a lot to do with the suicide rate, and mental health in general. I think needs to be a bigger topic on how do we progress correctly with all this, right? We're never going to fix the underlying causes that are really the cause of this. So no matter what, until we can say, hey, we're going to put this on hold so we can focus on this other thing that is a much bigger issue because it affects everybody. Until we can do that, we're never going to get those things done.
I remember, and for me, I'm terrible about times, but I remember the beginning of the discussions in this country of civil unions and what it all meant, and for me, being a typical straight guy, I had friends that were gay, and it seemed to me the reason I was supportive was because it wasn't about sex. It wasn't about sexuality, but it was about the fact that they couldn't go in and see their partner when their partner was in the hospital, or they couldn't get, they may have been married to this person for 20 or 30 years. And yet when that person dies, they don't get a say in their estates and how things are divided up and how they shared their life.
Yeah, they have no legal right to anything, and the family can come in and just take whatever they want.
My friend, this has been a fun and interesting topic. I think this has been a great way to kick off our show and our series. We are going to come back. Actually, I don't know how the timing is going to work on this. I don't know if we're going to be weekly or,
I think if we get our patterns down and start doing more consistent filmings and get a few episodes kind of lined up, we can start releasing them on a regular basis.
Most definitely. But stay tuned, stay looking out. This has been unpopular opinion with AC and Arc, and we've got some more.